So here we are, Chris.
Here we are, the first Red Rampant Rundown. This is going to be a podcast, a video series, whatever you want to call it, where we're going to try and take you on the journey of developing this passion project of ours that's been years in the making, and yeah, hopefully enjoy
Many years.
many, many.
Yeah, it's gonna be changing week to week, topic to topic,
Yeah.
depending on what we're working on that each week and any announcements that we have or any old discussions, old stories or design philosophies we want to discuss. But I think it makes the most sense in podcast number one to talk about version 1.1, uh, the massive patch notes that we just put up, with a lot of bug fixes, a lot of different things. We're just going to go through one by one, talk about each of these bugs, why they occurred, what we fixed, and just some of our thoughts on it. Um, this is crazy because we did so much testing before we released the game itself. Like,
Mhm.
I know you spent so many nights just banging your head against the walls.
It was a real eye opener and a really good insight into the almost sickening process you need to go when developing your own game. Like you've got to learn to love it and learn to hate it a little bit as well when you're testing. Like you've got to put aside all love and all biases you've got for it and just goes, okay, where's it broken? Where's it terrible? Where's it awful? And that it can be really, really torturous. And 5 hours in, hearing the same dialogue line you've just written 1,000 times and iterated, and and you'll grow sick of your game, but you can't lose sight of the end goal, which is to make it better. And that's what early access has really taught us, of like getting people whose eyes aren't so accustomed to the game onto it and just seeing things that we can't see. So that's been the whole process of
Yeah.
making early access.
Seeing things we can't see is the whole point there because we know how the game works. We know how you get from one sequence to the next sequence. And it's really hard to like unlearn that and like
Aye,
break your own game when you know how it's supposed to work. It's super weird. But before we launch into things, there's a quote from a famous director that you always talk, or like a
yeah,
perspective from a famous
yeah,
director. Do you know the
yeah,
one I'm talking about? You
yeah,
got
yeah,
you.
yeah,
I love this one that you said. Go on.
yeah. So it's Martin Scorsese, one of the greatest filmmakers to ever live. And he says when you're sitting in the edit bay and you're watching your rough cut, so the very first assembly that's been put together your film, and if it doesn't make you physically sick, you're doing something wrong. You're doing something wrong. And testing this made me feel physically sick at points, and made me just want to not design the game anymore. If that sounds dramatic, but when all you see are errors, when all you're looking for is errors, it can really color your perception to the point where you're just like, I made something really terrible. It's like there's no good here at all. There are no redeeming features whatsoever in this. It's just all terrible. I need to stop making video games. This is the end of it.
Yeah, you're collecting and amassing flaws that aren't just flaws in your game, but like flaws in yourself. Like
Aye, yeah,
this is your work, so every mistake in that is a mistake in you, and it messes with the mind a little bit. Before we dive down an existential rabbit hole and just can't pull ourselves out, let's dive into these patch notes. I reckon we can
aye,
sort out the existential stuff late at night.
yeah. That comes later. That comes
Okay.
later.
So, patch notes version 1.1, September 5th, 2024. We are recording this the week after, and the game itself released, just for context, the back end of July, I think July 26th. So this took us just over a month to put this patch notes together. Um, and we've sectioned it out into different categories. We're going to start with the doors because the doors are like number one reason why people get soft locked.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they're the type of thing that if you don't make a game, you have no idea how. I really just wanted to yell a list of expletives. Like that was doors are awful. I hate doors. They're so bad. They're so bad because you have in a game like this, in many other games, doors are fine. But in a game like this, when
Aye.
there's so much narrative sensitivity, times when you can go into a place, times when you can't go into a place, times when you could have gone into a place, but you did it in a different order, so now you can't. When if you lock a door and the player's on the wrong side of it,
Aye.
that's the game locked
Aye.
out. That's what uh, we in the biz call a soft lock, where it's not like the game's crashed, but you just can't continue. Um, and that can be like you get locked in the exterior environment and you can just walk around the world, which happened a few times, where players would get locked outside. But people also got locked inside, which is way worse because then you're just like locked in a dead room. One of the examples is when you get the sword for the first time. There's a hidden interaction not a lot of people know about, which is that you can swing the sword when he gives it to you, when your father gives it to you, and the father gets really angry because you almost hit your mother with the sword, and then he storms off into his room.
Mhm.
And I was watching people playtest this where they were like continuing to hit the father and followed him into his bedroom. And
Oh
then
no.
he slams the door into his bedroom. And then you're just in there with your father and the sword, and the game can't continue because you're supposed to have not followed him. You're supposed to still
Yeah.
be in the room. But that's this whole
Yeah.
thing where we want the player to be able to do whatever they want, to move during conversations. Not a lot of games do that. And
Hmm.
it makes sense
Hmm.
why, because this just ruins so many different situations. And we're not going to list all the situations where
No,
the
no.
doors mess us up. But we have done our best to remove all of those soft locks from the game. Um, I would probably bet about £2.50 that there's one or two more that we just haven't found yet.
I'll bet you
Um,
a fiver.
but but yeah, and there was some other bugs when the doors were opening halfway. This is because the doors were like both physics based and um like criteria based. Like they would swing open due to the code or swing closed due to the code when an NPC would walk through it, but then be physics based when a player would walk through it.
Mhm.
Um, and those interactions can be like one time an NPC opens a door, like at the end of the dinner scene, where Alana leaves, and then alchemist leaves, then Alana leaves, and when the alchemist closes the door behind him, and then Alana opens the door after him, Alana hits the alchemist with the door, and it stops doing its action where it opens, but it's not fully open, and then it just kind of like locks into place, but that is like 45 degrees and it's really weird. And players like kind of like, excuse me, trying to like get past.
Yeah.
Um, but we had a whole big design discussion about how we can fix this. And how we can fix this broader issue. Chris, do you want to touch on to the broader issue of nobody knowing that they can knock on doors?
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say, like, it's almost fitting that we're starting the first video and starting the first patch notes with the subheading doors. Doors are a really good symbol, really good metaphor of what we've struggled with as we're designing this game, of like wanting to keep to our original principle of minimal UIs, sorry, and not force the player down any path. Try and keep them as expressive as possible. But then that also colliding against the reality of, well, they need some sort of guidance if they're going to access all parts of the game. So the doors is like it's such a good symbol because they almost didn't know they could access them because we didn't give them any indication that they could access them. I mean, yeah, a door, yeah, you think you'd be able to open them, but with the player not giving any hint whatsoever, no dialogue, no glowy door that's got purple around it so you know you can access it, without any of that, why would you automatically go to the door? Why wouldn't you just go to the river like the game is telling you? So we really did find this regular push and pull between trying to be open, trying to be expressive, but then also finding a way where we can just gently remind the player that certain parts of the game, certain parts of the story are still there that they've yet to explore. So the doors, what we've introduced right away here, is a simple pop-up. So we have compromised our sort of minimal UI philosophy for now. For now, to just tell the player, oh, this is a place I can access. There are characters behind here. There are dialogue that's waiting for me beyond this door. Whereas previously, the volume of playtests that we would watch, where players wouldn't even brush against the door, was was a real
Oh,
source of
like
frustration.
almost every
Yeah,
single
it's a real source of
playtest I
frustration.
ever saw where a a player, like at the very start of the game, the player is told to go and wash the cloth in the river. The mother doesn't even want you to wash the cloth in the river. She's just trying to get you out the back because she has get you out of the room because she has a sword hiding behind her back. It's a whole thing that's revealed in a scene later on. But people naturally go to the river and continue the story that way. But there's other ways that you can continue the story. You can just kind of not do what you're told and go to knock on any of the doors. But people were kind of, well, number one, if they walked near the doors, it wouldn't tell them the button that they could knock on, which is what we tried to fix. But there were even some players who weren't knocking on the doors that weren't going to the doors altogether because they weren't knowing that they could they didn't like believe enough in the game that
Yeah.
there would be other paths because they're kind of not trained to think that way.
Mm.
It wasn't clear that they could be rebellious and
Yeah.
branch the narrative that early on when that's something that we built the game thinking is like, what if the player doesn't continue this conversation right now? What if the player doesn't do what they're told? There's a huge like design conversation anytime there's a scene, which is okay, but what if the player doesn't do what they're told? And we
Hmm.
always try and incorporate a decision for that. And
Hmm.
yeah, because people see the game and see it in its early access phase, they don't give credit that there's
Yeah.
another way to play a lot of these scenes, and they end up even when they rewind playing the scenes the same way, and it's like no, lots of different things you can do here, and we're working on a mechanic
Yeah.
that will come out in future that will indicate um when there are other paths that you can choose.
Yeah. But
But we really
yeah.
but this is the other big design philosophy that clashes in with this, is we really wanted to minimize the UI elements. A lot of games, let's just say like, Skyrim or like any Ubisoft game, there's always like quest markers, indicators, map trackers, like little kind of like notifications or icons that will show you where you can go play the game. And we didn't like that. We thought it was quite cheap and it was quite black and white in the sense of like here there is game and here there is not game. And we
Mm.
wanted the whole natural exploration of finding a timeline and the reflecting the true interaction of life, which is kind of like um just explore and try and see what happens, you know? The sound of the wolf's howl was deafening. I remember watching a Twitch stream and the streamer uh, was coming up to the bit where the wolf was going to howl at the start of day two. And people in chat were warning them, like, mute the stream, don't let the people like get deafened by this wolf howl. Um, and two things there. One, the wolf howl is really loud because it's meant
Yeah.
to move the plot forward and signal this interaction with the wolves. So that's why we tried to make it a high volume event. But the second thing is that it's so extremely high volume and lacks 3D because the wolf audio player is attached to the player itself and not the wolves.
Yeah.
So it's meant to be
Yeah.
a high volume thing occurring from far away, but it's literally in your
Aye.
eardrums. And the spatial audio that makes things sound either left, right, or distant or whatever wasn't coming into play because it literally originated in your brain with how loud it is.
Like this game fundamentally is an audio game. Like that sounds quite strange for me to say, but at this moment in time where the game is in its journey, where the narrative elements have been the focus for all our resources, we've tried to really make sure that that plays well and that the voice acting plays well. And so stuff like the combat has had to take a back seat. So really at the moment audio was needed to sing for us. And there were a few rampant issues where it would peak at the start and then tail off, and there would be some speakers that would be louder than others. So we just really wanted to get a more consistent sort of audio across the field, and so people can just enjoy the dialogue and enjoy the audio. Like Jake and I have been really, really surprised that the most common positive bit of feedback we get is they can't believe this game has voice acting, which is incredible to like Jake and I, because we just took it for granted that this game, of course, would have voice acting, and B, the
You
quality
couldn't
of it.
even make this game. You couldn't even make this game without voice acting.
No,
It
no,
wouldn't
no,
work.
you
People
couldn't,
would. It'd be just be a reading simulator. Like it would be garbage. I
you could,
wouldn't play it, and I wouldn't make it at the same time.
you couldn't, and it was the fact that it was Scottish as well. Hearing Scottish voices, now that's stirs the patriotic feelings in myself and Jake, but it was also you don't often hear Scottish voices and accents in video games. So audio is a really big importance to us, and you hear a film 60% more than you see it. So audio, like if you see a punch, you believe it's landed if you hear the punch. So we're trying to land these lines.
This is the last thing that we're going to talk about in terms of audio was the footsteps, and we're going to talk about them, and then we're going to drop the mics, drop the audio, and let you just hear what the footsteps used to sound like and what they sound like now. The next thing we should talk about is the cart. And I wrote it in this like janky font because the cart is top two jankiest things in the game after probably Arthur's T-pose, which is not fixed, probably much to the delight of the players. I've had many people ask that we don't fix that. We do have a fix coming up, which will redo all the character models and make them look amazing, but we'll talk about that in another video. Um, the cart is super janky.
Yes.
It bumbles about, it often flips around. Uh, we increased the mass of it and tried to reduce the jankiness. It is still sometimes a bit janky, but that is a little bit of a work in progress. It's just not, it's just it's just so light and flippable, and
Yeah.
the characters' movements are so like definitive and objective and unmoving. I was watching a streamer play the game and go up to the cart and click it and accidentally attach the cart to themselves like they were the alchemist walking to the clearing, and then had no idea how they'd done it. I in the comments had no idea how they'd done it, and they had no idea how to detach it, so they were then spent the rest of the game with a cart attached to their body. So that is the type of thing that only comes out through some thorough testing. The type of thing you never would have done. That's a good
No.
example of the type of
Yeah.
thing you never would have done. Just going around clicking random stuff in case it attaches to you because you made the game and you know that's not a thing. But it is a thing, and only someone who didn't make the game would try that out.
Yeah. And that's actually a good jumping off point for a wider kind of conversation about like why did we choose early access? And we've had that question previously, and for us it was really important to just finally get this out of our hands and into as many hands as possible. Like and to kind of co-opt this journey and to bring people on board where, the game is going to steadily develop before your eyes. Like we could have just created this in our own style and fully released it in like 6 months, a year's time, what we've got just now. But we wanted that kind of conversation with people playing it. We wanted that chat with players, and this is part of the chat we're having right now. So, as Jake says, there's no way in hell I would have found the click and cart, and that's why we chose early access as part of our journey.
Yeah, I'd even go as far to say that it's not just that we wanted people to play and test the game, it's that we needed people to play and test the
Aye,
game.
aye,
Um because of that exact dynamic. Um Speaking of exact dynamics, the rewind system is the key dynamic movement of the player, moving backwards through the timeline and choosing new options. And the animation for that wasn't hooked up and it was the wrong animation. There's a whole like rewind, like when you take it, like the actual time rewinds and it reverses your gameplay. And it's really cool. It's a really cool mechanic. And the actual release, I don't know how it happened, but it was hooked up to just be the slideshow, which is what
Yeah.
the reverse motion goes into. And also the slideshow, after seeing a bit of testing of it, it's way too slow. So
Hmm.
what was like a really climactic moment, it just became this like really slow, dead scene of like slideshow moments from your gameplay.
Hmm.
Um, so we made that a lot better. We also highlighted the rewind choices in pink in the speech wheel, which is something that will make it a lot easier to see when a rewind choice has been unlocked,
Yeah,
that it was something that you couldn't select before.
absolutely. And again, it goes back to that previous point we were making about just introducing more signage to the player about when stuff is unlocked, when stuff is available, and when they can play it. Like it's almost like part of Jake and I letting go a little bit and like allowing the player to be guided. Like, we almost had this Puritan idea of like let the player go and we'll just leave them to it, and we'll just leave them to it. And that still is really quite important to us. Like we're going to hold on to that. Like I still firmly believe that we need to let the player be their own author, as it were. But especially when we're at this early stage where we don't have all the resources we'd like, that we need to put a couple more guardrails and a couple more pointers to just let the player find out this stuff, like the text, like the purple
Yeah.
text.
And I think it's one of those games that's not like Minecraft, where the player can just go around and do whatever they want, and their gameplay is based off of that, and it's great. Um, and there really is no guidance to do what you want to do. Um, this game is like it it is still limited. Like you cannot create infinitely variant content in the same way that you can create infinitely varying combinations of Minecraft blocks and build your own house in your own way. But there is this really interesting game design decision to allow the player to discover themselves or direct the player to what they need to discover. It comes back to that film and storytelling philosophy of show, don't tell. Do you tell the player there's game content over there, go over and interact with it if you want to, or do you show the player the open world and try to naturally guide them towards where you have gameplay, knowing that they might not find it, knowing that they might go looking for it where it isn't, or not go looking for it where it is, like go to the place it's not hidden or not see that it's hidden in the first place. It's a really interesting game design decision, and we went all in on player freedom, on allowing the player to explore fully undirected, and that doesn't work right now because the game is missing a lot of that thread that holds it all together. The game is missing a lot of that just perfection and polish that will allow the player to kind of go wherever, do whatever they want, because it too often breaks. But the content that we are trying to implement, the mechanics that we're trying to implement that will connect those loose threads together so the player is much more likely to find what they haven't found,
Hmm.
that will lead us towards enabling minimalism again.
Yeah, it, just to kind of tail off that conversation, it's our ideal, and the ideal I think for all games should be. This is going to sound so contradictory, is not to tell the player anything. Like there should be little direct communication that tells a player, okay, go do that, and that becomes a question of approach. Now our approach was to always bake that in the game through dialogue, through a mechanic that's not yet implemented called the notebook. These in-game diegetic indicators of where they could head, where there might be a path open, but without, like Jake's saying, that polish and these mechanics which are not yet implemented, we've had to revert back to a more focused, we'll tell them. But we want to show the player everything. We never want to tell them. It's just illustrative storytelling that leads them on a path is the ideal for us.
So in terms of the lighting, there were some sharp transitions. I'm thinking of the dinner scene when it kind of goes from day to night like that. That's because of the way that the code is set up, where you can set the time of day to go from this time to this time, and it doesn't lurk, like it doesn't transition from that time to that time. So the shadows don't have enough time to like move around and darken, and the environment doesn't have enough time to change. It was just snapping. So we set it up to change more gradually, so that should be a lot smoother. Thinking again of the gradual fade in, fade out when you change days, that was really sharp. Lighting should never be sharp unless you're literally turning on a light switch or extinguishing a candle or something like that. We've talked about so much, and I feel like any other design philosophies we throw in the mix are just gonna get lost on the listeners. So I'd probably just wrap it there. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. Th- this has been our first time uh, speaking directly uh, to audience and players like this, so forgive us for any creases, just like our game. We'll try and fix them as time goes on. Fortunately, in real life, there are no rewind drugs, but progressively, as we do more and more of these, there will be improvements. And yeah, really, what we're just trying to do here is bring you into the conversation, and hopefully, you get an insight into what it's like to make an indie game, a game at this stage, and a game that really is quite ambitious. And we're trying to grapple with that ambition. Part of grappling with that ambition is having these honest conversations with ourselves. So hope you found that really fun and insightful. And yeah, we'll see you for the next one.